We are the Association for Child and Adolescent Mental Health, or ACAMH for short, and this is ACAMH Learn.
Hi, I'm Nicole Harris. I'm an educational psychologist with Portsmouth City Council. I'm also a visiting academic at the University of Southampton. As an educational psychologist, I work with children and young people up to the age of 25, helping to identify their strengths, their interests, and potential barriers to learning. One of my core areas of interest is the exploration of how feeling connected to nature impacts. Nature connectedness is a psychological construct that considers our emotional connection with nature and the relationship that we form with the elements in the natural landscape around us. There's a solid body of evidence in adults that shows that feeling connected to nature is beneficial for well-being and has a positive impact on cognitive performance, for instance, on attention. But there's less of an evidence base when it comes to children and young people. So I was interested to explore the current evidence base for children and young people, especially that may link to what we call behaviours for learning. So for instance, things like impulse control, focus, attention, and social skills. So what I was hoping to clarify through the study and what's important to me, the main objective really was to explore what sort of research was being conducted around the world on supporting nature connectedness in children and young people, focusing in particular on what was being carried out in schools. And this is important to me because research has shown that how connected to nature we feel as adults is influenced by how and if we're supported to connect with nature as children. So this means that the influence of our families and the access that we have to nature in our childhood and how we're encouraged to view nature, interact with nature, respect nature is fundamental to how connected we feel to nature as adults. So why does this matter? So on a global scale, this matters because feeling connected to nature has been shown to correlate with environmental behavior. So we're more likely to act in ways that protect and preserve our planet if we feel connected to it. To put really simply, we care for what we care about. So this also matters because for decades now, research has been showing that children and young people are feeling increasingly disconnected from nature. And this has come about through societal change, where some children and young people have fewer opportunities to connect and engage with nature, and technological changes. So many more of our children and young people are spending time indoors and online. So there's the element of nature connectedness being better for the planet. It's also better for us. Because feeling connected to nature has been shown, again, in adults to improve well-being. And there's an emerging evidence base that shows this is also true for children and young people. So significantly, research has also shown that well-being in children and young people tends to decrease in childhood as they approach adolescence. So drawing together those three main threads, the increasing disconnection of children from nature, the links between increasing nature connectedness and improving well-being, and then the decrease in well-being in childhood made me wonder whether establishing nature-based programs designed to increase nature connectedness in the school could have a wonderfully mutually beneficial approach. This also, of course, sits within the context of our current climate crisis and the growing rates of climate anxiety in our children and young people, who I believe that any increase in pro-environmental behavior is a good thing. So being aware of the intense pressure on schools to focus on academic attainment and other aspects of achievement, I wondered whether there might be evidence that nature-based activities to increase nature connectedness might also positively impact on behaviours for learning. And we felt that if there was evidence for this, then teachers may feel more able to carve out time within their overstretched curricula to spend on supporting nature connection. A lot of nature connection research is based on the theories of attention restoration theory by Kaplan and stress reduction theory by Ulrich. So these are reasonable expectations. Also, research in adults has shown that there are positive cognitive impacts of nature connection. So we wanted to explore what the current research said regarding the relationship between nature connectedness and behaviours for learning. And we took a broad perspective on behaviours for learning based on Ellis and Todd's framework. that consider the emotional, the social, and the cognitive factors that underpin learning. So we were looking for evidence, for instance, of improved attention, inhibition, social skills, resilience, and emotional regulation. Again, the reasoning was that if school might be better able to justify time being spent on these activities if they support children and young people to engage with learning as well as their mental health. Crucially, we wanted to review and evaluate the research that was set in educational settings, so largely schools is what we were looking for. We hope that any robust review findings would support us to be able to advise teachers and schools on what could be effective for them to do. So alongside this review, my co-authors and I also carried out parallel studies in schools exploring the effectiveness of some realistically implementable nature connection activities for teachers to incorporate into their curriculum. The short answer to this is yes. Most surprising was the lack of published research on programs that had actually been delivered in schools, sort of on school sites. So this meant that we had to modify the original inclusion criteria to include all settings working with children and young people, which were looking at nature connectedness and behaviours for learning. We propose that there may be two reasons for why so little research is based on or in school sites. And the first of these is that we think that schools are outsourcing any nature connectedness activities to external providers, or they're delivering them in natural settings that are a distance from the school. And this was the case for the majority of the studies in this literature review. We also wondered whether schools may be delivering nature-based activities, but they're just not gathering and publishing their reports. This suggests that there's a real gap then in the research or action research that in school to see what is achievable in terms of supporting children and young people to connect with the everyday nature that they have access to on the school site or adjacent to a school site. And this is all the more important really when we consider the more deprived areas, because research has shown that children and young people from the more deprived areas have an even lower access to and engagement with nature, meaning that schools could really be a key facilitator in this respect. We were also surprised to see how many studies found that social skills and relationships with others were positively impacted. In my work as an educational psychologist, the majority of my involvement at the moment in schools is in supporting children and young people who have real difficulties with emotional regulation and with social interaction. And equally, in the supervision sessions that I offer to teachers, a very common observation from them is how the children and young people in their classes have really underdeveloped social skills. So I was really delighted to see such strong evidence for time spent connecting with nature and being a way to foster and grow these very needed social skills, and as a way for children and young people to support their emotional regulation. But although I can feel this is true from a personal standpoint, my practice-based evidence, as the word shows me, the power of a walk in the woods. So I know that really helps me feel calm and refreshed and able to think more clearly. From a professional standpoint, where we support evidence-based practice, to have so many qualitative and quantitative studies seeing these improvements is really encouraging, and it means that as an educational psychologist, I feel confident in suggesting activities that increase nature connectedness as a way of supporting children and young people in school. And another surprise, again, personally, as someone who leans much more into quantitative data and quantitative research than qualitative, was the value and depth of understanding that came from incorporating the qualitative data into this systematic review. And that very much challenged my expectations. So a lot of the evidence around behaviours for learning came from the qualitative studies, but it also showed in asking the children and young people their thoughts and their feelings around nature connectedness. The qualitative studies allowed for much more nuanced understanding of their relationship with nature, and it really allowed for better understanding that the quantitative scores can't deliver. For instance, shedding understanding of climate anxiety or ecophobia. And there was one paper in the review, for instance, that mentioned how natural spaces can seem unsafe and threatening for some women. And although this may not relate to nature per se, but wider societal concerns, these are still details that you wouldn't necessarily pick up on in a low quantitative nature connectedness score. So this speaks again to the need for us to consider the use of nature connection scale, where maybe we want to start thinking about asking about potential negative thoughts and feelings that are associated with nature connectedness. Feelings, for instance, that might link to despondency and overwhelm over the state of our planet, but also about fears and anxieties that may reasonably exist about being in natural spaces. We hope that our findings will encourage and support school and other settings working with children and young people to incorporate nature-based activities designed to increase nature connectedness into their ordinarily available provision. We hope that this will become a core part of the curriculum that supports children and young people to thrive, not just survive. We've shown that there are a variety of ways that children and young people can engage with nature that improve nature connectedness and behaviours for learning. Best of all, we've shown that many of these activities can be low cost and easily implemented. The core message is really that being consciously present with nature, for instance, through interacting with, focusing on, being aware of the nature around you, helps to promote nature connectedness and behaviours for learning, particularly the important social and relational skills. Interestingly, we also found that the behaviours for learning improved even when nature connectedness didn't. I like the idea of supporting a relationship with nature as how we build relationships with people. So we know as parents that we can sit in our houses with our children in their bedrooms, each of us doing our own thing in our own space. And being in that shared space of the home doesn't necessarily feel that we feel connected or close to each other. To build those relationships, again, we need to be consciously present, interact with, focus on, be aware of who shares the space with us, and be that our children or the plants, the animals, the mountains, the streams, the nature that surrounds and sustains us. So some of the activities that were shown to improve nature connectedness and behaviours for learning were things as simple as walking and reflecting in nature. So thinking about how you're feeling, engaging with the environment through your senses, really noticing what things sound like or smell like or feel like. There are also art-based activities using nature. So for instance, things like sunlight photography or taking photos of nature and reflecting on the feelings that nature generated in you. The findings really support the idea that nature-based activities designed to improve nature connectedness or inclusion into all of our schools as ordinarily available provision. So I've been making the point throughout this presentation of saying activities designed to improve nature connectedness, which is quite a mouthful to go off. And the reason I'm careful to keep saying this is because this is a distinct idea from simply spending time outside. So although, of course, there are benefits to spending time in green empty spaces or through the increased activity levels that might come from being outside, the concept and construct of nature connectedness is different to either of these. And our research has looked at the impact of activities designed to increase nature connectedness specifically, and for an impact on nature connectedness specifically. There was a huge amount of variety in terms of how the studies were carried out. And this was both a strength and a weakness of the research base in that it showed that a number of different activities and levels of engagement were shown to influence nature connectedness and behaviours for learning. However, this also meant that it was then quite difficult to compare studies and draw overarching conclusions about the specifics of what works and why. There was also a huge variation in the types of physical environment that were explored and affecting nature connectedness. So in terms of green spaces, forests, seasides, and each of these may confer different benefits, but at present much of the literature takes nature to be almost any wild or outdoor space without being overly specific in terms of what this may or may not be. And there were difficulties in terms of what nature connectedness looks like at different age and how this can be measured. So again, different studies use different nature connectedness scales, and it wasn't always clear on whether the scales that were used were validated for use on children and young people. So these scales may have been made for adults and modified for use by children. And this matters because not just because of the language that may be in those scales, but how we experience connection and the relationships that we have with nature changes as we grow up. Few of the studies used control groups, and many had relatively small sample size.
Yes.
So, a couple of challenges there, but to help address these challenges and to help build a more robust evidence base, we designed as part of our study a framework to help education sort of plan and evaluate their nature-based interventions. And this is Table 7 in the paper. And we hope that it will support educators in undertaking and publishing their own action research. Finally, there is an underlying challenge of understanding what is and what isn't nature. So, for example, there are many who challenge the concept of seeing nature as something separate or outside us, rather than seeing nature as something that we are also an integral part of, that we too are nature. So exploring this bridge or the connection between our own nature and greater nature, between our internal and external spaces, is something that I and my collaborator, Dr. B. Hartwell, have also been exploring. So there are 3 parts to the key message that I would like others to take away. Firstly, I'd like others to better appreciate that there are many positive outcomes that come from fostering a sense of nature connectedness. There are benefits in terms of being able to engage with learning, for instance, improved attention, engagement, motivation, and independence. There's benefits to being able to engage socially, for instance, social skills, empathy, passion, collaboration, self-esteem. And the findings from other studies that are not part of this review, which have linked supporting the development of nature connectedness with improved well-being and pro-environmental behaviours. Secondly, I'd like to remind others that these activities and the benefits arising from them can be achieved through small-scale and low-cost activities. We don't, for instance, all have to go camping in Canada for a month. And finally, there's the need to develop the evidence base around delivering nature connectedness programs in schools versus by listing educators, using teachers and settings. And these projects could really help embed nature connection practices into the ethos and the day-to-day organic opportunities in school. And this would mean that they're less of an intervention and more of a simple way of being. That may be helpful for anyone interested to know that as part of our wider body of research and development, B and I are currently developing and evaluating what we hope will be a very valuable and impactful nature connectedness curriculum for educators to share with their children and young people. So we've already been trialing this with hundreds of pupils from schools across 4 different local authorities. And our curriculum offers teachers a series of structured sessions that they can follow with their children to help them become more consciously connected to both their inner nature and the nature that surrounds them. And the schools or other settings are interested in receiving more information about this, they can email me or be at the University of Southampton. Our contact details are. Thank you so very much for your interest in our research.